I have a 10-year-old son. Many times I've thought of taking him out of school and simply educating him at home. I can afford the best tutors. I have a fine home library. I believe I could so arrange things that he could get a much better education and far less time at home than he could by going to school, even though he attends what's considered to be an excellent private school. But I've realized that to take a child out of the educational establishment in the United States is to immediately rouse a dragon. The educational establishment zealously protects its mandate and monopoly. Indications that you might be able to do a better job simply because you could bring more concentration and more personalized teaching to bear fall on deaf ears. The system wants its children. Billions upon billions of dollars depend upon it. Millions of jobs, in fact, the largest industry in the country. Well, there's a book on radical views of compulsory schooling edited by William F. Rickenbacker entitled The 12-Year Sentence. It's a major attack upon compulsion in education by a group of discerning scholars and attorneys. Compulsory schooling is a relatively recent idea, but it is now embedded in the laws of all the states where it causes endless mischief. It's a boon to educationists, but grief to dissenters and taxpayers, and it poses some interesting questions. For example, what do you do if you're an Amishman and believe that most education offends God? What do you do if you're a Christian Scientist and the public schools require your child to be vaccinated before he can attend classes? What do you do if you believe in a biblical version of the creation and your children are taught Darwinian ideas? What do you do if you're a modern secularist and your school insists on teaching the biblical version of the creation? What do you do if your school is mediocre and you wish to teach your gifted child at home? What do you do if your school is infested with dope addicts, hoodlums, and depraved youngsters, but you can't afford to send your child to a good private school? What do you do if your educational bureaucracy forces ever-increasing taxes and ever-inferior schooling on you? What do you do if you desire to withdraw your child from public school one day a week for religious instruction? Well, this book, The 12-Year Sentence, is about just such problems, and it tells what the courts and educationists did to just such dissenting people who were caught in the coils of truancy law. I know I've thought a great deal about compulsory education. I don't like that word, compulsory, do you? When someone tells me I have to send my child to school, and by so doing indicating that he can do a better job of educating my child than I can, my hackles rise, and I think many people feel that way. Murray N. Rothbard, one of the writers of the book, points out that compulsory schooling began in the modern world with the Protestant Reformation. Before the Reformation, instruction had been carried out privately in church schools and universities, in private schools, and in private guild schools for occupational training. But Martin Luther, in his famous letter to the German rulers in 1524, urged the establishment of public schools and compulsory attendance, and did so on the basis of a military analogy. He wrote, "Dear rulers, I maintain that the civil authorities are under obligation to compel the people to send their children to school. If the government can compel such citizens as are fit for military service to bear spear and rifle, to mount ramparts, and perform other material duties in time of war, how much more it has a right to compel the people to send their children to school, because in this case we're warring with the devil, whose object it is secretly to exhaust our cities and principalities of their strong men." Well, influenced by Luther, the German state of Gotha founded the first modern public schools in 1524. Thuringia followed suit in 1527. Luther himself devised the Saxony school plan, which was established in Saxony in 1628. The first compulsory attendance system was established again under Lutheran influence by the Duke of Württemberg in 1559. Attendance was compulsory, detailed records were kept, and fines were levied on truants. The major purpose of the school system was theocratic, to use the power of the government to compel adherence to Lutheranism and to aid in the suppression of dissent from the established church. The other leading influence on the establishment of compulsory schooling in the modern world, and one even more relevant to the United States, was that other great reformer, John Calvin. Once again, the major object for public schools was to inculcate obedience to a Calvinist-run government and thereby to aid in the suppression of dissent. Control their little minds, and you can control them when they grow up. And that's my comment, not Murray Rothbard's. People think of compulsory education as something which will guarantee the best possible education because it's in the hands of the school authorities. But a good friend of mine told me that he's attended educational conventions and conferences which covered a multitude of subjects, virtually all of them related to the people in the educational establishment, but he never once heard anyone at any of these meetings or conferences ask the question, how can we do a better job of educating the children? The purpose of my comments here is not to criticize the quality of American education. That's been done by people much better qualified than I, many of them in the educational establishment. But to pose the question, is compulsory education, is the taking of our children away from us for the purpose of learning in their and our best interest? Perhaps in most cases it is. In fact, were it not compulsory, I'd say that in the vast majority of cases our system of education is excellent. But I don't think it applies to all, for many of the reasons I outlined earlier. Anyway, I'm putting the 12-year sentence on the recommended reading list. I'm sure educators will find it as interesting as we more passive parents. Another book I'm recommending is Why Marriage by Edward E. Ford, with Robert L. Zorn, with a foreword by my friend Dr. William Glasser. We asked why education must be compulsory, so why marriage? As Edward E. Ford writes in the preface, down through the ages when men of great creativity have written new and exciting ideas, many who have known them and who have liked what these men had to say then attempted to popularize what was said. This is what I've attempted to do, he writes, with the creative thoughts of Dr. William Glasser, author of Reality Therapy, Schools Without Failure, and the Identity Society. The impact of Dr. Glasser's ideas has yet to be fully realized, but the simplicity and profoundness of his words are having wide acceptance. Those who hear and read what he has to say have said these ideas make sense and they work. And I see this book as one of many which will attempt to popularize reality therapy for the general public. But what about marriage? Is it here to stay, or is it not such a good idea after all? Well, the author writes, I believe marriages of the future will continue to be what they are today. One man and one woman in a close personal relationship. There are a great many reasons why this type of relationship will continue. One reason is simply the joy of love two people find together as husband and wife. Another reason is that the marriage-family concept as it is known today is the best way to bring up children. It's also the best way to teach children the meaning of love and concern. You know, the family is the only place, the only agency in our system in which love is taught. Basically, all children learn about love relationships by observing and imitating others. If all they experience in a home is fighting, children learn little about love. What they do learn is how to fight. To a large extent, children are a reflection of the home in which they're raised. If their home is full of laughter and love, the children will live and spread what they've learned. Anyway, I think you and your spouse will enjoy reading Why Marriage. It so happened that my time for writing this issue of Direct Line fell in December 1974. In fact, as I wrote the words I'm sharing with you now, the date was December 31st, 1974, the last day of a busy and crisis-filled year. As I sat down to my typewriter, newspaper headlines across the country, and the Western world for that matter, carried stories of deepening recession and increased unemployment. Once again, our most amazing invention was in a state of nerves and near panic. That invention, of course, is culture. Sociologically speaking, culture, according to my excellent Random House Dictionary, is the sum total of ways of living built up by a group of human beings and transmitted from one generation to another. The sum total of ways of living, but the human way of living, an invented, a contrived, a different way of living from that with which we were originally endowed. That's what makes it shaky at times. Culture is an invention. It's something we consider to be an improvement over the so-called natural way in which we found ourselves, living in the forests and savannas, living off the bounty of nature, as do all other so-called wild creatures on Earth. Much of human culture rests upon economics. Staying with my Random House Dictionary, economics is the science dealing with the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services, or the material welfare of mankind. Without material welfare, everything else tends to break down. As a species, it's too late to return to the forests, savannas, and beaches, to that island time of which Mr. Stetzel writes in his book School for the Young. We've been too long gone from that kind of existence. It's as Thomas Wolfe once put it, you can't go home again. Evolutionally, we've burned our bridges behind us, and we stand today on the continent we've chosen. There's no going back, even if we wanted to, and you'd be hard-pressed, I think, to find many who'd even want to go back. We invented culture, we invented economics, and even called it a science, believe it or not. E.F. Schumacher, in his book Small is Beautiful, states that economics is not a science at all, but rather an imperfect art form with which we continue to struggle as we search for stability. But what does all of this mean to you and me? Well, certainly we as persons can't do much about global economics and stability of human culture. Well, to an extent, we can do something about it. We can make certain that the organization of which we are the head, our family, and in many cases our business firms, are in good economic order. If the economic order is good, that which is built upon it, culture, this business of living as intelligent and civilized human beings and doing some of the things we like to do, is possible. If the economic base is bad, the entire hierarchy of things which make culture culture tends to collapse, and everything becomes very primary again, very primitive. It becomes a matter of food and shelter. And when staying alive and out of the elements become the primary considerations of the human creature, much of what makes him human tends to fade. The first thing to disappear when you're hungry is your sense of humor, and when you're struggling for survival, the good of the species becomes academic. But let's keep economics in its place. Things seem to be in a state of turmoil, and whenever this happens, I dig down for basics. Now, we have them with the facts of culture and economics, with those very human inventions which we shall consider to be basically good as starting points. Where do we go from there? For answers of this kind, you simply cannot do better than to go back to that ugly philosopher, Socrates, son of a stonecutter and a midwife, enormously strong, very brave, charming, and brilliant. He believed that success could never be more than a short-term affair unless it was founded on logical truth and moral right. He told us what the most prized possession is, the one good and the one evil. Do you remember what they were? In times like these, it's easy to forget. Once, when looking at a variety of merchandise exposed for sale, Socrates was heard to observe, "How many things I can do without." He said he was nearest to the gods because he had the least number of wants. About that most prized possession, Socrates said that it's leisure. And he recognized only one good, knowledge, and only one evil, ignorance.